The city street was unusually calm that evening. Traffic rolled by in a slow, steady rhythm, and the soft glow of streetlights stretched long shadows across the sidewalk. At the edge of the block, beneath a flickering lamp, a lone man sat quietly on a worn wooden bench. He didn't look important. No flashy clothes, no security, just a black jacket, a dark cap pulled low, and hands folded calmly in his lap. To most people passing by, he was invisible. He stared ahead, relaxed, almost meditative, as if the noise of the city didn't exist for him. A few pedestrians walked past without giving him a second glance. Others barely noticed him at all. He was just another quiet man on a street bench, nothing special. But a few steps away, 3 men noticed him. They slowed their pace, exchanging looks and smirks. To them, the man on the bench looked like an easy target. Alone, silent, mind his own business, the kind of person who wouldn't fight back. One of them laughed softly. "Look at this guy," he muttered. "Doesn't even look up." They circled closer, boots scraping against the pavement. The man on the bench didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't react. His calm only seemed to irritate them more. "Hey," one of the men snapped, raising his voice. "Didn't you hear us?" Still, the man remained seated, eyes forward, breathing steady. Not fear, not defiance, just silence. That silence made them uncomfortable. People nearby began to slow down, sensing tension in the air. A couple standing across the street paused. A shop owner peeked out from behind his glass door. Something felt off, like the calm before a storm. The 3 men stepped even closer now, invading his space. They had no idea who he was. They had no idea what he was capable of. And as they continued to provoke him, one thing became clear to everyone watching. What they were about to do was a mistake they would never forget. The 3 men stopped just a few feet from the bench. Up close, the quiet man still didn't look threatening. His posture was relaxed, shoulders loose, hands resting comfortably on his thighs. He hadn't even turned his head to acknowledge them. That, more than anything, irritated them. One of the men scoffed. "Is he deaf, or just pretending we're not here?" Another stepped forward, deliberately blocking the man's view of the street. "Hey, old man," he said sharply. "This your bench now?" No response. The quiet man's eyes remained forward, calm and unfocused, as if he were listening to something far away. Cars passed. A bus hissed to a stop down the street. Life went on, but right here, the air felt heavy. The 3rd man laughed and shook his head. "Told you, he's scared." That word scared changed everything. The man on the bench finally shifted slightly, crossing one leg over the other. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but deliberate, controlled. Not nervous. Not rushed. The men missed that detail completely. They took it as permission. One of them leaned in closer, close enough that the smell of alcohol hung between them. "You hear me talking to you?" Still no answer. A few pedestrians slowed their steps now. A woman across the street reached for her phone, pretending to text while watching from the corner of her eye. A delivery driver paused beside his truck, sensing something wasn't right. The man on the bench remained silent. That silence felt louder than shouting. "Say something," the first man snapped, shoving the bench with his knee. The wood creaked under the sudden pressure. The quiet man finally looked up. Just once, his eyes met the man's steady, unreadable, almost bored. There was no fear there. No anger either. Just awareness, the kind that made experienced fighters uneasy, though these men didn't recognize it. "See?" The second man laughed. "He's nothing." Encouraged, one of them reached out and poked the man's shoulder. That was when several bystanders audibly inhaled. The quiet man exhaled slowly through his nose. His hands relaxed further, fingers loose, as if preparing for something, though nothing about him looked aggressive. Still, he did not stand. Still, he did not speak, and that made the situation worse. The men mistook restraint for weakness. They mistook discipline for fear. One of them stepped directly in front of him now, standing so close their knees almost touched. "You got a problem?" he demanded. The street felt silent, even though it wasn't. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. A car horn blared. But right there, every eye was locked on the bench. This was the moment where things could have ended, where the men could have walked away, where the quiet man could have stood up and left. Instead, none of that happened. And without realizing it, the 3 men crossed a line, one that could not be uncrossed. The man standing in front of the bench smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind people wore when they believed they had complete control over a situation. When they believed the person in front of them had already lost. "You got a problem?" he repeated, louder this time. The quiet man didn't answer. Instead, he slowly uncrossed his leg. It was such a small movement that most people missed it, but a few in the crowd felt it, that subtle shift in energy, like the air tightening before a thunderstorm. His posture straightened just slightly, his spine aligning, his feet planting flat against the pavement. Still seated, still calm, one of the men laughed nervously. "Man, this is boring," he said. "Let's teach him how to respond." That was when the first real mistake happened. The man closest to the bench reached out and grabbed the quiet man by the collar of his jacket. Not hard, not yet, just enough to feel powerful, just enough to provoke a reaction. The crowd froze. A woman across the street covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "This is going too far." A phone camera zoomed in, its red recording light blinking quietly. For the first time, the quiet man spoke. "Let go." 2 words, low, calm, not a threat, not a plea, a warning. The man holding his collar laughed. "Or what?" The quiet man's eyes lifted again, locking onto his. This time, the look was different. Still calm but now sharp, focused, like someone who had assessed a situation and reached a decision. The hand on his collar tightened. That was the second mistake. In one smooth motion, the quiet man stood up. Not fast, not slow, just effortlessly, as if gravity itself cooperated with him. The bench creaked softly behind him as his weight left it. Suddenly, the men realized something they hadn't noticed before. He was bigger than he looked. Not bulky, not flashy, but solid, balanced. His presence filled the small space between them instantly. The man holding his collar took an unconscious step back, but his grip remained. That hesitation cost him. The quiet man gently removed the hand from his jacket. Not violently, not angrily. He simply peeled the fingers away, one by one, like correcting a mistake. The movement was precise, controlled, and shockingly easy. "What the man began. He didn't get to finish. With a single fluid motion, the quiet man redirected him sideways. The movement was so fast and efficient that it looked almost unreal. One moment, the man was standing. The next, he was on the ground, gasping, staring up at the sky in disbelief. The crowd erupted in gasps. What just happened? The other 2 men froze. Their confidence vanished instantly, replaced by confusion and fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how this story went in their heads. The quiet man stood there, breathing evenly, hands relaxed at his sides. He hadn't thrown a punch. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't chased anyone. He had simply ended the moment. "Back away," he said calmly. His voice carried not because it was loud, but because it was certain. One of the remaining men hesitated, pride fighting with instinct. He clenched his fists, glancing at his friend on the ground, then back at the man standing in front of him. "You think you're tough?" he snapped, though his voice betrayed him. The quiet man didn't answer. He didn't need to. His stance said everything. Balanced, still, ready but not aggressive. People in the crowd began whispering again. "That wasn't normal? Did you see how fast that was? Who is this guy?" The man on the ground groaned, slowly rolling onto his side. Reality was catching up to him along with embarrassment. His friends looked at him, then at the quiet man, then at the growing crowd. Phones were everywhere now. This was no longer a private confrontation. This was a public spectacle, and they were losing. One of the men took a step back, then another. "This isn't over," he muttered, trying to save face. The quiet man watched them retreat, his eyes never leaving theirs. He didn't chase. He didn't taunt. He simply stood there, until they were several steps away. Only then did he turn. Slowly, deliberately, he sat back down on the bench. The crowd was silent. People stared at him with wide eyes, trying to process what they had just seen. A man who looked unremarkable, quiet, almost invisible, yet capable of ending a dangerous situation in seconds without rage, without chaos. A man near the back of the crowd whispered the question everyone was thinking. "Who is he?" No one answered, but one thing was clear now. Those men hadn't just made a bad decision. They had made the worst mistake of their lives. For several seconds, no one moved. The quiet man sat back on the bench as if nothing unusual had happened. His hands rested on his knees again. His breathing was steady. The street noise slowly returned, cars passing, footsteps echoing, distant conversations resuming, but the people nearby were still frozen in place. They stared at him, not with fear this time, with confusion. The three men stood several steps away now. One of them helped their fallen friend to his feet. The man's face was red not just from pain, but from humiliation. He avoided looking at the bench, pretending to brush dirt off his jacket while stealing nervous glances in that direction. That was lucky, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for his friends to hear, but not loud enough to provoke another response. The quiet man didn't look up. That made it worse. A small crowd had gathered now, people who hadn't seen the beginning but sensed something extraordinary had just occurred. Phones were raised. Someone whispered, "Did he just take that guy down?" Another replied, "I didn't even see how." A man in his 40s, standing near a parked car, narrowed his eyes. He leaned forward slightly, studying the man on the bench. Something about him felt familiar. The posture, the stillness, the way he sat, as if completely aware of everything around him. "I've seen that before," the man murmured to himself. Across the street, a young woman replayed the video she'd just recorded. Frame by frame, she watched the movement again. No wasted motion, no panic, just control. "That wasn't street fighting," she said quietly to her friend. "That was training." The three men huddled together, whispering urgently now. Pride told them to leave. Ego told them to say something, anything, to reclaim a shred of dignity. One of them turned back toward the bench. "You think this is over?" he called out, trying to sound confident. Slowly, the quiet man raised his head, just enough to meet their eyes. "Yes," he said. One word. Calm. Absolute. The men stopped talking. They didn't respond. They couldn't. Something in his voice told them there would be no second warning. They backed away again, this time without insults, without laughter. Their steps were faster now, less controlled. Within moments, they disappeared down the street, swallowed by the city. No one followed them. All attention remained on the bench. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Who is he? Is he military? Did you see his hands?" A middle-aged man wearing a leather jacket stepped closer, cautious but curious. He tilted his head, trying to see the quiet man's face more clearly under the shadow of the cap. Then his eyes widened. "No way," he whispered. The words didn't carry far, but they carried enough. "What?" someone asked. "What do you mean, no way?" The man shook his head slowly, disbelief written across his face. "I might be wrong," he said, "but that looks a lot like..." He stopped himself. The quiet man lifted one hand gently, not in warning, but in restraint, a silent request. The man understood. He nodded and stepped back, saying nothing more. That simple gesture said everything. The quiet man didn't want attention. That realization changed the tone of the crowd entirely. People lowered their phones slightly. Conversations softened. The energy shifted from excitement to respect. A teenager whispered to his friend, "Why wouldn't he want people to know?" "Because real power doesn't need to announce itself," the friend replied. The quiet man adjusted his jacket and looked down the street, as if checking whether the men were truly gone. Satisfied, he leaned back again, eyes drifting forward. But the whispers didn't stop. Someone searched on their phone. Someone else compared screenshots. Another stared, then gasped quietly. "It can't be," a woman murmured. But if it is, the crowd buzzed with half-finished thoughts and unspoken conclusions. No one said the name out loud yet, but it hung in the air, heavy and electric. The quiet man sensed it. He exhaled slowly. This was the moment he had tried to avoid. Recognition was coming, and once it arrived, there would be no turning back. The quiet man felt it before he saw it, that subtle change in the air, the way curiosity slowly transformed into certainty. He kept his gaze forward, but he could sense the crowd studying him more carefully now, not as a stranger, not as a victim, but as someone known. A man near the back of the group stared at his phone, then back at the bench. His eyebrows knitted together as he zoomed in on a paused video frame. "No way," he whispered. He showed the screen to the woman next to him. Her eyes widened. She covered her mouth instinctively, as if afraid speaking might break the moment. "That's him," she said softly. "It has to be." The whisper spread. Not loud, not chaotic, just quiet disbelief moving from person to person like a ripple across still water. "That posture, those moves, I've seen that before. The quiet man adjusted the brim of his cap slightly lower, not to hide, just enough to delay what was coming. He had lived in the spotlight long enough to recognize this moment, the exact second when anonymity begins to slip away. A middle-aged man stepped forward again, braver now. "Sir," he said respectfully, keeping his distance, "I don't want to cause a scene, but are you?" The quiet man looked up, not sharply, not defensively, just enough. Their eyes met. The man froze, his face drained of color as recognition hit him fully. He took a small step back, shaking his head in disbelief. "Oh my God," he breathed. "It really is you." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Phones rose again, not aggressively this time, but with awe. Some people stopped recording altogether, suddenly unsure if they should. One young man whispered, "Wait, Steven Seagal?" The name wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It landed like a weight. A few people gasped. Others laughed quietly in disbelief. Someone muttered, "That explains everything." The quiet man, Steven, stood slowly, lifting both hands slightly, palms open. "Please," he said calmly. "Let's keep this peaceful." His voice was deeper than people expected, calm, grounded. The voice of someone who had spent decades controlling chaos rather than creating it. The crowd obeyed instantly. A woman near the front spoke up. "Why didn't you say who you were?" Steven smiled faintly. Not proud, not amused. "Because it shouldn't matter," he replied. "Respect shouldn't depend on a name." Those words hit harder than the takedown had. People nodded. Some lowered their heads. Others felt something shift inside them, an uncomfortable but necessary realization. The three men who had started everything were gone now, but their presence still lingered like a bad memory. Someone scoffed quietly. They had no idea who they were messing with. Steven shook his head gently. "That's not the point," he said. "They didn't know who I was, and that's exactly why this matters." Silence followed. No one interrupted him. "They saw a quiet man," he continued, "and decided that meant weak. That's a dangerous mistake to make." A police siren echoed faintly in the distance. Someone had called it in earlier. A few people glanced down the street, wondering what would happen next. Steven didn't seem concerned. He picked up a small bag that had been resting beside the bench, slinging it over his shoulder. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. He wasn't trying to escape. He wasn't trying to stay, just move forward. A young man spoke hesitantly. "Sir, what you did back there, you could have really hurt them." Steven nodded once. "I know, so why didn't you?" Steven paused, then looked back at the bench where it had all started. "Because control," he said, "is the highest form of power." That sentence stayed with everyone who heard it. When the police car finally turned onto the street, lights flashing softly, the crowd parted naturally. Officers stepped out, scanning the area. One of them recognized Steven instantly. "Sir," the officer said, respectful, almost stunned. "Is everything all right?" Steven nodded. "It is now." The officer glanced at the crowd, then back at Steven. "Do you want to file a report?" Steven considered it for a moment. Then he shook his head. "No." The officer hesitated, then nodded. "Understood." As Steven turned to walk away, people instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path for him. Not out of fear, out of respect. Behind him, the street buzzed softly with conversation, disbelief, and admiration. Ahead of him, the city waited, just another place where a quiet man could sit on a bench, until someone made the mistake of underestimating him. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the street, painting the faces of the crowd in shifting colors. Conversations faded into hushed murmurs as two police officers stepped fully into view. Their presence brought a strange calm, like the final note in a tense piece of music. The officer who had spoken to Steven moments earlier turned to his partner and spoke quietly. The partner glanced at Steven, then did a double take. His posture changed instantly. "Oh," he said under his breath. "That's him." Steven noticed but said nothing. The crowd noticed everything. Phones rose again, but this time not to capture conflict, to document a moment. A quiet one, a rare one, the kind that didn't need shouting or violence to feel powerful. The officer cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. "All right, everyone, let's take a step back." No one argued. A few people pointed down the street, explaining what had happened. Others showed videos. The officers watched briefly, just enough to understand. No punches thrown, no chase, Just one clean movement that ended everything before it could explode. The first officer turned back to Steven. "Sir, those men who were involved, do you want to press charges?" Steven considered the question carefully. 800 pairs of eyes seemed to wait for his answer. "No," he said finally. "They've already learned what they needed to learn." That response surprised the officers. It surprised the crowd even more. A man near the back whispered, "If that were me, I'd make sure they paid." Steven heard him. He turned slightly, not confrontational, just open. "Punishment doesn't always teach," he said. "Sometimes awareness does." The officer nodded slowly, clearly processing the words. "We'll still file a report," he said, "in case those men try something again." "That's fair," Steven replied. As the officers stepped aside to radio in details, the crowd began to buzz not loudly, but intensely. People talked about what they had seen, how fast it happened, how controlled it was, how different it felt from the usual chaos captured on viral videos. A woman replayed her clip and shook her head. "He could have destroyed them, but he didn't," her friend replied. "That's the scary part." Across the street, the three men who had started everything watched from a distance, partially hidden behind a bus stop. They looked smaller now. Not physically, emotionally. The bravado was gone, replaced by something closer to fear and shame. One of them rubbed his neck, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Another kept checking over his shoulder, as if expecting Steven to appear again. But Steven didn't look their way. He had already moved on. The officers finished their calls and approached Steven one last time. "Sir," one said respectfully, "we're going to escort you a short distance, just to avoid any more attention." Steven smiled faintly. "I appreciate that." As they walked together, the crowd parted again, instinctively creating space. No one tried to stop him. No one asked for autographs. No one shouted his name. They simply watched. Some recorded, some reflected, some stood quietly, realizing they had witnessed something they would talk about for years. At the corner, Steven paused. He turned back to the crowd one last time. "I didn't come here to teach a lesson," he said calmly. "But if anyone takes one from this, let it be this." He looked directly into the phones, into the eyes behind them. "Strength isn't about hurting someone when you can," he continued. "It's about knowing when not to." Silence followed, then quiet nods. Steven turned and continued down the street with the officers, his figure slowly blending back into the city lights. Within minutes, he was gone, just another shadow among many. But the moment he left, the street exploded with activity. Videos were uploaded, messages were sent, titles were typed. "Man on bench turns out to be Steven Seagal. Bullies picked the wrong guy. You won't believe who this was." Across social media platforms, the clip spread faster than anyone expected. Comments poured in by the thousands. "That's real discipline, real power right there." They thought quiet meant weak. By the time the three men finally slipped away, the story had already outpaced them. Their faces blurred, their voices drowned out, their moment reduced to a lesson, one they would never escape. And somewhere across the city, Steven Seagal walked on, unseen again. But this time, the world was watching. By the next morning, the city street looked exactly the same. Cars passed, people sat on benches, life moved forward as if nothing extraordinary had happened there the night before. But online, everything was different. The video had exploded. Clips from half a dozen angles flooded social media, short, silent moments showing a calm man standing up, a sudden shift in balance, and a bully hitting the ground in stunned disbelief. No dramatic music, no slow motion needed. The control spoke for itself. Within hours, millions had seen it. Headlines followed quickly. Bullies target wrong man on street bench. Quiet stranger reveals elite skill under pressure. Steven Seagal shows why real strength is discipline. People didn't just watch the video, they studied it. Comment sections filled with reactions from around the world. "He never even looked angry. That wasn't aggression, that was mastery." They thought silence meant weakness. Martial artists broke down the movement frame by frame, pointing out the efficiency, the lack of wasted energy, the perfect timing. Former law enforcement officers praised the restraint. Parents shared the clip with their kids, saying, "This is how you handle yourself." And then, there were the others, people who admitted the video made them uncomfortable, because it forced a hard truth into the open. We live in a world that often mistakes loud for strong, aggressive for powerful, flashy for dangerous. But what the world had witnessed on that quiet street was something else entirely. Control. Steven Seagal didn't post the video. He didn't comment on it. He didn't repost headlines or respond to praise. For most of the day, he remained unreachable. When a journalist finally caught up with him later that evening, the question was simple. Why didn't you walk away? Steven paused before answering. Because walking away isn't always about leaving, he said. Sometimes it's about staying calm when someone wants a reaction. The reporter asked the question everyone was thinking. You could have seriously hurt them. Why didn't you? Steven looked down for a moment, then back up. Because power without control is just chaos, he said. And chaos always comes back to hurt someone. The three men who had started everything never spoke publicly. Their faces were blurred in most uploads. Their names never trended. The internet moved on quickly, uninterested in their excuses. But the lesson followed them. Every replay of the video reminded viewers how quickly arrogance can turn into regret, how fast assumptions can collapse, how dangerous it is to underestimate someone just because they are quiet. Days later, the bench became something unexpected. People stopped there not for photos, but for reflection. Some sat quietly, thinking. Others talked about the moment, replaying it in their minds. That could have gone so wrong, someone said. But it didn't, another replied, because he didn't let it. That was the part that stayed with people, not the takedown. The restraint. Steven Seagal never returned to that street. He didn't need to. The message had already been delivered, not through words, but through behavior. A quiet man, a public challenge, a choice, and that choice echoed far beyond a single night. Because the truth is, everyone faces moments like that, not always with fists or threats, but with pressure, disrespect, and provocation. Moments where reacting feels justified, moments where ego demands control, and moments where the strongest thing you can do is stay calm. The video slowly faded from trending lists, replaced by the next viral moment, the next outrage, the next distraction. But for those who really watched it, who understood what they were seeing, the lesson stayed. Silence is not weakness, calm is not fear, and real strength never needs to announce itself. Sometimes, it just sits quietly on a bench until someone makes the mistake of underestimating it.